And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. As you mentioned, that OrbiMob is focusing very much on the situation in France, and more specifically the area around Clermont Ferrand. And we are focusing on Asia. So I think that one of the challenges is also to see whether we do actually have something in common in terms of the narrative that we are focusing on in Asia, and the narrative that you are focusing on in OrbiMob. And I do think that there are certain similarities and there are certain common questions which we have both in France and that we have in Asia. You mentioned that we are looking at the Asian transport outlook. And with the, let me just go to the larger screen. The reason for the Asian transport outlook is that if we want to make progress in developing the transport sector, we need to know the transport sector. I just saw a brief message this morning on a McKinsey report, and the McKinsey report said that the global community will have to invest about $2 trillion a year on transport in the period up to 2050. That if we talk about $2 trillion at the global level, it is probably fair to say that at least half of this would be spent in Asia. So we're talking about an industry which has an annual investment level of about $1 trillion. But how well do we know the sector? So if we want to make policies, do we have really an idea what's happening in the sector? And I think that that is one of the key reasons why the Asian Development Bank decided that they would like to have this instrument called the Asian Transport Outlook. The purpose of the Asian Transport Outlook is very simple, is what is happening in the transport sector? Can you document the transport sector across 51 economies in Asia? And we are currently looking at everything starting from Iran to the east and everything from Russia down to the smallest Pacific country. That one of the things that we see when we look at information on transport in Asia is that we often end up on the website of the International Energy Agency. The International Energy Agency or the International Transport Forum have also a lot of information on transport in Asia, but they do not report at the country level. They only report at the level, either they say China and India, and then subsequently they say the rest of Asia, but policy is being made at the individual level of the individual country. And the same is that if you're looking at the OrbiMob program, one of the problems, and I would guess that one of the conclusions that's coming out is that you need to have localized data in order to drive policy making. So that you could say is one of the first, let's say, things that we have in common if we look at the larger Asian region, and if we look at your smaller region. So then when we talk about transport, we need to learn how do we define transport. And so in the context of the Asian Transport Outlook, we're looking at it in the broadest sense of the word. We're looking at, we have something like 9 workbooks, as we call it, in our database. We're focusing on infrastructure. So what is the current structure? What is the, let's say, how many roads do we have? Or how many railways do we have, et cetera, et cetera. We're looking at transport activity, and that we say, like, how many vehicles are there? How many kilometers do these vehicles drive? Who is using these vehicles? So all of that information is important if we talk about access to economic and social opportunities. Then we have the access and connectivity indicators. Like in Japan, during the time of economic crisis, in Japan, they were very fond of economic stimulus programs where they were building roads and bridges. But often these roads and bridges were built in areas where there was no traffic. And that is again a question that you also need to consider in your part of the world, that you say, like, infrastructure is probably required and the growth in infrastructure is required, but where do you situate it? So then we're also looking at a range of sustainability issues. We are looking at road safety. So how many people are being killed? How many people are being injured? And more about that later. We are looking at air pollution. We are looking at climate change, which is obviously quite an important topic as well. But at the same time, we're also collecting a large number of socioeconomic indicators because we need to be able to put transport sector into the context of the wider economy. And that is, for example, related to employment, what is the contribution to GDP, etc. And we are collecting a number of miscellaneous indicators, for example, at the moment, what is the context or what is the status with respect to COVID. So we are collecting this information in terms of data, but at the same time, we are also collecting policies. Because in many cases, you will be able to find how many railways there are in Asia, but it's much more difficult to find out which countries are adopting what policies on the railways. So all of this information is in a publicly available open access database. And currently, you can see how many indicators we have. We have about 200 plus indicators at the moment. Then how do I go to the next slide? Oh, here. Then in terms of policy, what we have developed is for all the 50 countries we have, 51, we have a profile where we are documenting all of the transport policies. We have summarized these policies for the various countries, and we also have the original source documents. So anybody who would like to do research on transport policy in Asia, whether this is on infrastructure or whether this is on road safety or on climate change, let's say we have a one-stop shop where you can access all of this information. Then, in terms of cities, because Asia is the most rapidly urbanizing region in the world. And in many cases, that we say that the future of transport is to a large extent determined how the cities in Asia are actually developing their transport sector. So currently, we are about to put this online. We have an urban database where we have 412 cities in Asia and where we have 48 cities from other parts of the world. And you can see this indicated here on the map with the red dots. So here you are actually able to compare France with New Delhi, or Paris with New Delhi, or Paris with Shanghai, and things like that. And again, the indicators are divided into a number of categories, and these are pretty much the same kind of indicators that we have also at the national level. But one of the things that we are looking at the city level is also the urban form and the urban structure. That is an important indicator, set of indicators as well. Let's say, how are the cities shaping up, and what's the consequence with respect to transport activity? So this database will be available in the next 2 weeks online as well. So basically, this is, if we talk about the Asian Transport Outlook, it is a very large amount of data at the national and at the urban level. And basically every category related to transport is represented. Obviously, the challenge is not so much to create this in the first place, but the challenge is really, how do you sustain such an effort? How do you make certain that this data is being updated and is being collected in the future as well? So, and I would assume that also in the context of OrbiMob, that you would say, we need to do a study on topic X or on topic Y in order to collect information. And I think doing a study is not the most difficult thing. But if you want to sustain your effort, you need to make certain that there are organizations and entities who continue to collect this data on an ongoing basis. Also, if they do not get an external contract to collect this data. And that is where it is important to identify the owners of the information, and you need to identify who has the mandate to collect this information. And then the question is, are they willing to buy into the argument that this information is important? And so that is a problem that we are having, or a challenge that we are having in Asia. And I would assume that this is a challenge that you would have in your program as well. So now, a little bit about comparing Asia with the rest of the world. So what we have done here, this is a fairly complicated graph, but basically what we're doing is that what is the Asian transport outlook share of the global? And we want to highlight three numbers here. Asia currently has 58% of the global population. But then if we look in terms of transport activity, which is the 36 and the 27% in the other red box, currently Asia has 27% of the global passenger transport and has 36% of the freight travel. So what conclusions can you draw from this is that if we look at the future, it is extremely likely that the transport sector in Asia will grow, and that and it will grow quite strongly. And that means that all kinds of discussions that we are having in the European context about decarbonization are entirely different in Asia. Yes, Asia needs to decarbonize its transport sector as well, but at the same time, Asia needs to grow its transport sector. Like we did some on the back of an envelope calculation, and at the moment, an average person in Asia travels, let's say, half of the distance that a person in Europe travels per year. So if the people in Asia would start traveling at the same rate as the people in Europe, it would mean that in Asia, that we would double the CO2 footprint from passenger transport. So, and this also, it changes the entire equation if we talk about transport policy in Asia to a transport minister or to an economics minister or a planning minister, because rightfully they will say, yes, we need to decarbonize, but how can we decarbonize transport if we don't have enough transport? And that is one of the key things. At the same time, let's say if we look a little bit, because we do not want to say that Asia is remaining behind Europe in all respects, there are also a number of them where you can see like this 58% where Asia is scoring higher. For example, like if we look at high-speed rail, we know that France is one of the pioneers in terms of high-speed rail in Europe. But we see that in Asia, where Japan was the pioneer, and then followed by China, we currently have 7 countries in Asia which are either having high-speed rail or which are planning high-speed rail. And at the moment, 70% of all the high-speed rail is in Asia. If we look at electric vehicles, currently in 2019, 97% of the electric vehicles were in Asia. Like if we talk about, for example, I don't know whether you're talking about the move towards electric buses in Clermont, Ferrand, but if you go to a city like Shenzhen in Asia, they have currently 11,000 electric buses on the road. So it is there we see that that Asia is actually ahead of Europe. But then a more negative example where we are ahead is, for example, air pollution. that if we look at fine particulate, often coming from diesel vehicles, there we see that even though that Asia only has 36% of the freight transport, that Asia has 76% of the PM 2.5 death in the world. So it is quite a nuanced picture that we need to consider if we talk about Asia versus the rest of the world. So then talking about data, what kind of issues are you running into when you start collecting data? In this slide, just to give you an impression also of the level of detail of the information and the level of rigor in our collection, is that here you see information on road length in Asia on the left side. And you can see that there is a wide range of difference in terms of the measurements of how many roads there are in Asia, according to different sources. And this is also something where we see now that in the past, this kind of information was collected on the basis of traditional surveys, that kilometers of road were measured, literally with a tape measure or with some kind of measuring device, and on the basis of that, we were able to see what the situation was. Now, we're starting to see that we can use big data. We can use things like OpenStreetMap in order to come to a much quicker assessment of the amount of infrastructure which is there. And this is again something like I would assume that in OrbiMob that you would also be looking at the use of big data in terms of collecting information on infrastructure and transport-related infrastructure in your area. We wanted to flag again the difference between Europe and Asia is in terms of the average road length per capita. So it's clear that if you look at it, the Americas and Europe, you each have 16 or 15 meters of road that you can call your own. But in Asia, we are in the low and middle income countries in Asia, we are only at 3.5 meters. So it's clear that there is a considerable need to catch up, and a similar situation we can see in Asia, sorry, in Africa as well. If we look at railways, we also see that in terms of railways that there is a large range of differe's in the amount of railways that we see in the countries. We see that there's still a growth in heavy railways, and we see a growth in urban rail in Asia. But we see that the growth in high-speed rail is much larger than what we would have in terms of heavy rail and urban rail. Of course, the baseline for high-speed rail is quite low if we look at these various years. So to some extent, you could say that this is also a bit misleading. But what is important is that at the moment, the construction in road construction is growing faster than rail construction. So as a consequence, what we see in Asia is that freight, which in several countries was traditionally transported by rail, or in other countries by inland water, which from a climate perspective is to be preferred, is that we see that this is now shifting to roads. So there, it's again important. You can promote one thing, but if you don't measure what's happening to all the modes of transport, you are not able to keep a good overview. One area where Asia is definitely on the right way is in the electrification of railways. And we see that India, for example, now has a very ambitious plan to have all the all of its railways electrified by the middle of this decade. And we see that China is currently already at 70% electrification. So overall, where we do see railways, that they definitely make an important contribution to the sustainability of transport. Then access, rural access. I mentioned before that this is an important issue. Like in Asia, we currently have about 470 million, or sorry, 600 million of people who do not have access to an all-season road within 2 kilometers. So that means that we have farmers, and they have difficulties in taking their produce to the markets. They have difficulties for their children to go to school. They have difficulties to access health facilities. And the only solution that exists is that if they have farm produce, they need to carry it on their head to the nearest road, or they need to drag it through the fields with an ox or a horse or another animal. So it's clear that these are very primary problems. Like if you go to an area where the people live who do not have access to an all-season road, and you talk about issues of sustainability, then they say, look, we are jealous of the people who have these problems because we do not have the roads. And this is an indicator which is nowadays very easy to measure with satellite data. So you don't need to go into the field to actually visit each village. You can actually study the satellite maps, and you can use those in order to arrive at these conclusions. Then urban access. Here you can see this is the share of population with convenient access to public transport. And you can see which are the Asian ones, and you can see where does Europe stand, where does Australia, New Zealand, etc. And here you can see again that Asia is behind the developed world. So again, it means that if we talk about urban transport, we do need to improve that. So we need to come up with additional transport services with, in many cases, let's say public transport. But in some cities, there will also be a need to construct additional roads, because the cities are growing very rapidly in Asia. So the size of the city is increasing. So that means more roads, more bike lanes, more sidewalks, but also more public transport. Road safety is another topic where I wanted to say something. Currently, 800,000 people die each year in Asia because of traffic accidents. It is estimated that this will cost on average about 6% of GDP. All the people that sorry, just a second. Let's switch this off. Yeah. It should be simple like that. You just click on the button and it stops ringing, but it was not that simple. But anyway, so what I was saying is that 800,000 people are being killed in transport in Asia each year. And typically, the professionals estimate that for each person who gets killed in transport, that there are about 10 persons who are seriously injured. So you can see that this is a massive, this has a massive impact on the daily lives of people in Asia, and it has a massive impact on the economy. It has a massive impact on the health sector, because typically, like any average hospital in Asia that you enter, you can say that about a third of the people in hospital that these are in hospital because of traffic accidents. And we know that on the basis of the situation in Europe, that a very large part of these deaths can be avoided by safer cars, by safer roads, by safer driving. So this is a key issue if we talk about transport in Asia. Like in Europe, this is no longer the major topic of discussion. It used to be in Europe, but in Europe, we have been able to address this and to resolve this somehow. But one of the interesting things from a measurement point in Asia, what we see is the difference between what the countries report and what the actual data are. And that's what we are also showing here in the chart on the left. On the right, we are showing that as countries grow richer in Asia, that we also see that road safety is improving. Like we see that in the low and the lower middle income countries, the number of people dying in transport is still going up. But we see that as countries grow richer in Asia, that we see that it is actually improving. And that is actually a very strong, powerful message to the countries in Asia, is grow rich and improve your road safety. Transport CO2 emissions. Transport is currently, in most cases in Asia, the largest sector in terms of where CO2 emissions are coming from. It also is the sector in most countries which is growing the fastest. And if we compare Asia with the rest of the world, it is also clear that that transport in Asia is growing faster than in other parts of the world. So it is clear that there is a tremendous challenge ahead of us. But there is also good news. We are starting to see in high-income countries, in the same ways that we saw that road safety is improving, is that we see a decoupling of the transport emissions from GDP growth. So it means GDP is growing much faster than CO2 emissions. And we see in the low and middle income countries, we see that there is a relative decoupling. So, and we expect that as the economies continue to grow there, that we will expect that also in those countries that, that things will be changing. We see that because of these changes in policy, because of the changes in technology and the changes in behavior, we see that the outlook in Asia is starting to change. Patrick referred to our joint activities around COP21. And during the days of COP21, we were still quite pessimistic, both at the global level and at the Asian level, when it came to the business as usual scenarios in terms of transport emissions. And the general feeling was that we would see a doubling of CO2 emissions and that we would have 16 gigatons by 2050 in the world, and that we would have 8 gigatons of CO2 emissions in Asia. But if we now look at the business as usual projections, which have been coming out from organizations like the International Energy Agency, the International Transport Forum, etc., is then we see that the situation has changed and that the challenge is becoming less daunting. And this is an important message because Patrick and I have been to many workshops on transport and decarbonization. And typically the message there was, transport is very hard to decarbonize. And that transport is the most difficult sector to decarbonize. And so our feeling is that the world is changing and that this is no longer the appropriate message, and that the appropriate message is now is, yes, there are challenges involved in the decarbonization of the transport sector, but it is probably not necessarily the most difficult sector, because it might be, if I also follow the discussions here in Holland, that agriculture is probably maybe even more difficult, or that industry is more difficult. So I think that this is important as an important message. And I assume that the decarbonization of transport, looking at the program of today, is also an important topic in today's meeting. And it's clear that that the situation is changing. This morning we had a meeting with the government of Malaysia. The government of Malaysia is at the moment developing a decarbonization strategy, which is going to be discussed by the cabinet later this month. And 10 years ago, the idea that that Malaysia would have a decarbonization strategy moving to net zero by 2050, this was unimaginable. And so we see that countries are taking up the challenge. We see that the technologies are becoming available, as we also saw in the previous presentations. So it is important to keep in mind that both in Europe and in Asia, that the discussion on transport and climate change is changing. Obviously, in Europe, things are going faster at the moment than in Asia, but in some cases, we think that Asia will be able to catch up. Then one of the differences, I think, which is important if we talk about Asia and Europe, is policies. Currently in Asia, the 51 countries, only 61% of the countries have a formal transport policy. Only 39% have a road policy, only a quarter have an automotive policy, and only 33 have a logistics policy. And in many cases, these policies were adopted before 2016, before the Paris Climate Agreement, and before the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted. And I think that this is obviously important. Change is happening partly through projects, through multi-sector initiatives between the private sector and the public sector. But it is important to incorporate this in policy, because if you want to have change at scale, and if you want that this change is not project-based, but that this is really becoming a permanent feature, then it needs to be incorporated in policies. And I think that this is something where Europe at the moment still has a clear advantage over Asia, because in Asia, we need to strengthen the policy framework before we can integrate sustainability issues in the policy. And that, so a little bit about climate is that we're starting to see that countries in Asia have net zero emission targets. So currently we have 14 of those. We are seeing, however, only a limited number of countries which have specific transport related targets. We see a lot of people talking about the need to reduce emissions in the transport sector, but it's more in a qualitative manner and not so much in through quantified targets. And that was the last of my presentation, so that I think we still have 10 minutes for questions. So, and then we also have Sudhir Gota, who is also listening into the call, and Sudhir is, I would say, a very significant part of the Asian transport outlook. Yeah, so a lot of the data which I presented have actually been collected and analyzed by Sudhir. Yeah, but yeah, so we're happy to answer any questions, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Cornie, and thank you so much. Always talented and passionate. I'd like, before turning to the question, I'd like to bounce back on just a few points. I think that you insisted very rightfully on the fact that localized data are absolutely key to get pertinent policies. I mean, this is absolutely essential, absolutely essential. And this is also the reason why I'm talking to the audience, why we picked up within OrbiMob, we picked up only 4 départements to make sure that at this scale, we might be able to develop the right tools, to develop the right strategy. Strategy involving not only policies, but also efforts for innovation efforts coming from the private sector and the sector. This notion of localized data is extremely important. Second remark, I would like to And thank you for mentioning Shenzhen and the 11,000 or so buses. Okay, because when I listen to if you could turn your microphones off, that would be better.
Mais elle est pas, attends, mais elle n'est pas commencée encore.
Non, c'est toujours la dernière.
Please, could you turn your microphones off?
Patrick, you can do Patrick or Chima can do that as well.
Yeah, Chima, if you could. Yeah. Okay, very good. The second, when you refer to Shenzhen and the 11,000 buses, electric buses, I think that it's important at one point in time to realize that we continue sometimes talking about experimenting things, okay? And that makes me very sad because the time is not about experimentation anymore. It is about scaling up. That's it, okay? So we should not ask ourselves whether it's time to experiment this or this solution. It's time to move ahead and to develop a real industry and real effort to transform the situation. The third element I'd like to pinpoint is also the reference that you made about the fact that, if I'm correct, about 56% of the, or Asia represents 56% of the rural populations not having easy access to services and this sort of thing. And in certain respects, this is an element that we have in common with some of our mountain areas. And so we should not regard Asia, once again, as a different world, but we are sharing a lot of common issues. And we should sometimes try to get inspiration from these countries, especially in the field of frugal solutions. Okay, because these countries, in most cases, don't have a lot of money to invest, and it's important to have a look at what they do. The fourth message is about decoupling. I think this is a very interesting thing that you put your finger on, Cornie. It's a message which is extremely heartening, I would say. And it shows that progressively, even though the change is not spectacular, things and more importantly, mindsets are changing in this respect. So this is extremely important. Maybe the fifth is about the fact that, yeah, you are mentioning hope in this respect. And it is true. I think that from this morning, we have seen that coming from the car manufacturer's side, coming from the energy side, coming from the rail world and so forth, we see that incremental solutions are changing the world, and we can get there. We can get there. So by 2050, we might have accomplished a fabulous job. Maybe we will not be decarbonized completely, but we might get pretty close to this objective. And maybe the fifth is that, as you have seen, Cornie is just like myself, a young retiree. I think that young retirees are a fabulous resource to instill ideas, experience, and wisdom in the transformation processes that we are all looking for. And I think that we'd better take advantage of this also at territorial level. And this is some of the effort that we'll try to develop within OrbiMob, which is just a joke, but it's a reality. Okay. Questions?
Patrick, can I just, on your point number 4,
yeah.
way about the rural access.
Yeah.
I think that we notice that there is a tendency to focus on transport infrastructure at the expense of transport services.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what I have in mind.
Yeah, and this is something which, because in many cases, like even if you have a road, but for example, take let's say the rural areas here in the Netherlands. If you have the old old people, so there is a road, but they are too old to drive. And the old people have a need to go to the hospitals. So the question is, how do they reach the doctor? How do they reach the basic services? And so what you're starting to see is all kinds of localized solutions. And this is where the young retirees sometimes also play a role, and that they volunteer.
Absolutely.
And so there is some kind of app or some kind of possibility to create that access. And the same is within the urban areas, is that if you don't have the right transport services, then you can invest a lot of money in infrastructure, but it's not really going to solve the problem. So that I wanted to emphasize the services argument.
Thank you for doing that. Yeah, that's excellent. Avez-vous des questions? Je m'adresse donc à nos auditeurs. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions particulières? N'hésitez pas à les poser en français. Il n'y a pas de problème. Maybe just one point, Cornie. All the material that you presented is available, right? All the Asian Development Bank documents can be retrieved from internet?
This can all be retrieved from and if you look at the last slide, we have also put some contact emails. So anybody who has problems, just send an email to me or to Sudhir or to the Asian Transport Outlook at gmail.com. This is all available. And if you just Google Asian Transport Outlook ADB, that will take you automatically to the website.
Okay. Are there special circles where a direct contact with Asian countries to talk about these evolutions in Asian countries and so forth can be used, and that we could use as a resource for us?
Sorry, is this question
but my point was to say, how can we more directly, or do we have to go through the Asian Development Bank to get a direct access to some of the seminars or arenas that take place in Asia, to precisely develop a dialogue between
I would say that a very good way is also for those people who are on Twitter is to subscribe to ADB Transport, the ADB Transport Twitter account, because you will find a lot of messages which are being posted there that in terms of workshops, webinars, and things like that.
Okay, that's interesting, because as you know, we have decided to start OrbiMob in Auvergne and to try precisely to have a localized action. But the spirit in which we developed this initiative is to try to aggregate other territories in the world. And I think that in this effort, not only should we target some European territories, but I think that we should also look at some Asian countries. And that is something that should happen in the next couple of years.